Hi, Ted.
Hi, Nan.
How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm having a sore throat, but other than that, I'm doing fine. Uh, so today my guest is Ted Ralphs. He's a professor in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at Lehigh University, and is a co-founder and director of the Laboratory for Computational Optimization Research at Lehigh. It's known as COR L. He's also co-founder and board member of the COR Foundation, a non-profit foundation promoting the development of open source software for OR, as well as the project manager for a variety of projects hosted in the COR open source software repository. He's the area editor for software tools at the Informed Journal on Computing, and the area editor for data, software, and computation at Operations Research. Ted is also a fellow of Informs. His research interests include theoretical aspects of discrete optimization, such as duality and complexity theory, development of a variety of methodologies for solving a range of discrete optimization problems, such as those with multiple levels or multiple objectives, development of parallel research algorithms, development of open source software, and applications of discrete optimization. Ted, I'm really glad that you have accepted the invitation. Such an honor to have you here today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. This is an honor for me as well.
Yeah. So let's start. Ted, is your actual name Ted?
No, I mean I use Ted on all my papers, but my given name is actually Theodore. I just have never really, I never really liked the formality of Theodore, even for using on papers. So my mother calls me Theodore, and that's about it.
Yeah, I see this trend in some distinguished personalities from our field, like not only you, Ted Ralphs, but also Bob Bixby, Bill Cook, Jeff Linderoth. So I suspect you guys prefer to adopt the alternative name to make it, more cool,
Yeah,
maybe.
I think it's informality is kind of we don't like to have pretense, I think, in our field.
Where do you originally come from in the US?
I come from actually not far from Lehigh originally, a place, small town, Hatfield, Pennsylvania. It's just north of Philadelphia.
Uh-huh. And tell me a bit about your parents.
My dad was always well, he actually started out working at what was then called the telephone company, Bell Telephone. He was an engineer. He didn't really like it and quit to become a teacher. So he was a teacher the whole time I was growing up, first in math and then physics. His undergraduate degree was actually in physics, and my mom was a biology major. When I was growing up, she didn't have a formal job. She did many businesses and things on the side while she took care of us. She was quite entrepreneurial, and my parents actually together ran this toy company for many years that came out of like toys that they made for us. So both of them were very crafty. They're woodworkers. They had a woodworking shop in the basement, and they would we didn't have a lot of money, so they would make the toys for us, and even we had garden in the backyard, and everything was homemade. We raised our own chickens, and so basically everything was from scratch. And yeah, it was a very nice upbringing, but without a lot of money.
Uh-huh. Any siblings?
I have one brother. He's 2 years younger. He lives in Rhode Island, and he's actually a veterinary surgeon. So a totally different world.
uh, what are your best memories from growing up in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so my mom would have a conniption if you said that I grew up in Philadelphia, because she's very much a country person, and she herself was actually born and raised in Philadelphia, but in the on the what's called the main line, which is a bit of a suburb. But she would never say that she's from Philadelphia. So we actually never really went into Philadelphia, even though I grew up not that far from there. So the house that we grew up in was kind of amazing because now it's not that rural anymore. But at that time, it was very rural. We didn't have like even a formal address. It was one of these rural delivery routes, and no street address where the postman just knows you, and So yeah, we had a lot of time outside and running around in the woods and playing in the creek, and had a big farm right behind our house where there were cows, and we would go over there and see the cows and all that sort of thing, collecting the eggs from the chickens. And so yeah, it was a totally different life than I have now, but a very nice, peaceful childhood there.
Yeah, more connected with the nature, probably.
Yeah. I mean, my parents are very outdoorsy, so we would do a lot of camping and that sort of thing.
Were you a shy kid?
I was extremely shy. I mean, I still am shy, I would say, but I've made a lot of effort to overcome that. Yeah, but when I was a kid, I was very painfully shy. If I had to give a speech or something or talk in public, I would just be completely frozen. And yeah, I was it was tough. My mom was also that way and, helped me a lot with my confidence and things. But I worked very hard to try to overcome that.
Did that prevent you from finding summer jobs and things like that?
I guess not really. I mean, I was actually a swimmer from about age 10. That was kind of my athletic passion. And then through that, I became a lifeguard and worked at the pool in the summers. And so that was pretty natural. And that's actually where I met, I would say my best lifelong friends was working at that pool there. And then in high school, I got a job selling computers. I was horrible at it. And we got paid an hourly rate, but then the real money, I think, was in commissions. And I don't know if I ever really sold a single, big system that it was pretty bad. And I also didn't actually know that much about the computers we were selling. It was a weird job. But anyway, it was something. I was actually, the shyness did prevent me a bit from being a good salesman. So that was not good. But
yeah. So you were a swimmer, you mentioned.
Yeah, that was my big athletic passion for, up all through high school. My high school had a very competitive swimming team, and I was, not a star at all on that team, but I was a pretty good swimmer, and did that passionately, but ended up just overdoing it to the point where now, well, in college, I wasn't able to continue because my shoulders were just completely blown, and now I can't really swim too much still. But I picked up rowing in college, so that was the substitute.
Yeah. What style did you use to swim?
I was a specialist in breaststroke, which, most people are either good in breaststroke and not that good in the other strokes, or vice versa. So yeah, I was the breaststroker, and that was, I don't know, maybe kind of went along with my personality. The stars of the team were the, people doing freestyle and butterfly and things. Yeah. I was kind of, happy to have the bit of a backseat role, but I was a very good breaststroker, and that's something that fills a role on the team. So it was good. I was happy with that.
Do you think the fact that you were an athlete helped you somehow in your academic and professional life?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it definitely is something that can give you confidence, and it gives you a work ethic. It definitely was at that time, and as a kid, swimming was in a way the most challenging thing I did. I mean, school was, I guess not that much of a challenge for me, and I guess I wasn't really necessarily one of those kids that was just voraciously reading books and doing all the extra stuff outside class and everything. I mean, school was pretty easy, and I was just happy doing that, and and then having other things going on outside of that. I always fought being too much of a nerd, so I didn't want to do like the chess club I preferred to do, athletics and things like that to stay more well-rounded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked you this because I had a student, his name is Vitor Nezelo, and he was also a swimmer back in high school. And then he was going to competitions even in South America, in other countries, not only Brazil. And he had this, work ethic, discipline, and so on. And he took that when he joined university to also conduct research activities regularly and in a high level for a considerable amount of time. And I once spoke with him about this, and he also thought that the fact that he was a swimmer could have played an important role in his ability to keep on having the motivation and always try to do things in a good level. So there's this competitive side, which can be good, right, in some situations. And he became a very good optimizer, and also nowadays a software engineering, I will say. And he's working at Optima. He co-founded that company alongside Francois van der Beek and other colleagues of his. So he's in Bordeaux now, right? Did you have any interest in music?
I was not that musical in a sense. I mean, my parents are very musical. My mom could, sight read complex piano music, and my dad played the guitar, and they were just very musical. My mom also played the banjo and dulcimer, and many things. I don't think either my brother or I actually inherited that musicality. I was a drummer. That was my main thing when I was in high school, but I probably wasn't very good at drumming either. I was in a rock band. In principle, I mean, we were terrible and never really played anything in public, I don't think, but we just like to get together and, beat on things and be loud. And, and my parents were very tolerant of all that. So I played the piano somewhat reasonably for a while, but yeah, now I haven't kept it up. So.
Yeah, so if you were a drummer and you played in a rock band, I suspect you were familiar with Neil Peart, the drummer of a band called Rush, which is one of my very favorite bands.
Of course. Yeah. So Rush is also probably my favorite band of all time.
Oh, really?
And I was I was a very big fan of Neil, and that was actually the very first concert I ever went to was Rush, and I went with, I was too young to go by myself, so I went with the other guy who was in the band with me. His dad took us to the concert because my parents wouldn't be caught dead going to a rock concert. So yeah, that was very formative experience.
Yeah. Do you remember the year?
Oh my God, no. I wish I don't even know if I remember what tour it was, to be honest. But it had to be probably like 85 or somewhere around there, 84. I don't know.
Right. Like Race Under Pressure tour, probably.
Yeah, could have been.
Something like that. Yeah. That's awesome. That you're a Rush fan. It's not every day that I get to meet one. Yeah, I saw them once in 2010 when they came to Brazil. So it was a fantastic experience. It was like a dream coming true, and I was so happy that I got the chance to see them live.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome.
What about books? What did you like to read in those days?
Oh, that's a good question. In those days, I don't think my brother was a big reader, but I actually don't think I was too big a reader. I mean, to be honest, even like the books that we were supposed to read for English and things, I was always trying to find shortcuts around reading them, and reading the Cliff's Notes and things. So I don't think I can answer that question, to be honest. I don't think I wasn't really a big reader, I guess, back then.
But that changed over the years, right?
Yeah, so I like to read a lot now. I guess now I read more nonfiction. I like to read historical things, just to understand history. I don't think that, when you learn history as a young kid, I don't think you can really appreciate it much. You have to go back and relearn it as an adult in the context of the world. And I've done a lot of reading in that vein. I actually listen to audiobooks quite a lot. Like, I just got through a really interesting one called The Power Broker, which I highly recommend, but it's very long. And then I would say the most influential book I've read recently is the Gödel Escher Bach, which is just, to my mind, just an incredible book. And I can't believe that I had it on my shelf for a long time and I just never read it until a few years back. And it's really like an amazing book.
Right. Did you always know you wanted to be a mathematician?
So, yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is that I didn't really want to be a mathematician. I was, I guess, very good at math, and I got pretty far ahead in the curriculum at my high school because my dad was a math teacher, and he was basically teaching me some of the courses at home, and then he managed to get a deal that I could just take the exams and not actually take the class. And so I got pretty far ahead, and then, but I don't know. I guess I was really, really good at it, but it wasn't like a passion. So I actually wanted to do something different when I went to college. And I guess I thought I wanted to be some kind of engineer, but I didn't really know what. I wasn't sure, what I wanted to do with my life, to be honest. I was pretty unsure when I went to college.
And why and how did you start studying mathematics at CMU in 1987?
Yeah, so I ended up being a math major despite my best efforts because I had a military scholarship, what they call an ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. And that was basically the only way that I could, afford to go to a place like Carnegie Mellon that's pretty expensive. So I had that military scholarship, and at that time they had priorities. I guess the different majors were ranked by the priority they were for the military, and you could change majors and keep the scholarship, but only to a higher priority major. And math was like the number one priority, and they wanted me to study math. And so that was the one major that you actually couldn't change out of. So I just did it, and I was still just, not that enthusiastic about it, but I discovered, two things happened. One is I got into this kind of accelerated math curriculum, which at Carnegie Mellon was called Math Studies. It was a multi-semester curriculum that basically wove together all of mathematics in a sense, and you had the same professors all throughout, and it was kind of like building up mathematics from very first principles all the way up. So there weren't like separate classes or anything. It was just this one curriculum, and that was very influential. And then I also, discovered operations research, and that was actually one of the majors that you could have within the mathematics department, and I didn't know anything about it, but I saw that and I was like, that is very cool. And I just knew, like, okay, this is what I want to do. I didn't really want to be an abstract mathematician. I wanted to do, something that was a little more practical and hands-on, where you could see the application of it. So yeah, I just saw that, and I took the linear programming course, and that was it. Like, I was just hooked on that. So that sealed my fate. I was a mathematician. Even though that, wasn't my plan. Life is funny that way.
Yeah. That sounds great. Did you apply elsewhere or only to Carnegie Mellon?
I don't exactly remember every place that I applied. I do remember that I applied to MIT. I don't think I got into MIT, to be honest, but yeah, my memory is a bit foggy now. But in any case, I did visit MIT, and I didn't like it that much. I don't want to, for people who are there, sorry. As a place to go for undergrad, it didn't seem that friendly to me, which I guess probably isn't that surprising. So,
yeah, and how did you decide about CMU?
I went to CMU for they had these things called sleeping bag weekends. I don't know if they still have them, but you could go there and stay with current students in the dorm and sleep on the floor basically, and just experience the culture and the campus and everything. And it was just a really nice experience. I don't remember too many details now, but I just remember that after I went there, I was pretty much decided. It's a nice campus. It's relatively small. It's very personal. It just felt right. And I also knew someone who was at Pitt at that time, and a friend of mine from high school. So that was another aspect of it. But yeah, it just felt right. And that was just after that weekend, I just decided, okay, that's where I want to go.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that the math program was quite unusual. And then you also mentioned that you discovered OR along the process. But have you ever attended a class with Egon Balas?
Yeah, so the way this program works, it was accelerated enough that you basically finish the undergraduate curriculum in 3 years, and then you can either do another major or you can get a master's degree or something like that. And so I decided to get a master's degree, and I ended up taking classes over in what was then GSIA. I think it's something different now, but where Egon was, and I actually took integer programming from him as an undergrad, which was a bit daunting. But I didn't know who he was at that time. I mean, it was much later that I found out who this guy was. Like, honestly, I wish I could go back and understand what it was that I was experiencing. I think I slept a lot in class, to be honest. I was very sleep deprived as an undergrad. I don't think I stayed awake in very many of my classes, but yeah, I would have stayed awake if I'd realized what I was having the privilege to do.
Yeah, back in the day, you kind of took it for granted.
Yeah, very much. I mean, not taking the education for granted per se, but just, that opportunity is, of course, like, a great opportunity that not many people get to have. And so, yeah, I should have appreciated it more, but I just had no idea.
And how did it feel to have Cornuéjols in your master's committee?
Yeah, so he was on my master's committee, and again, I didn't know really who he was. He was obviously a giant of the field. Actually, I didn't even know that was going to be my field at the time, so I just didn't appreciate any of this. But I didn't have that much interaction with him. He was not my main advisor. My main advisor was Alan Fries, who's in the math department. I think he's still there. He was more of a combinatorics guy, I think. But yeah, I mean, my master's thesis was pretty poor in my estimation. But Gérard nicely signed it anyway, even though now I can put myself in his position and think would I sign that? I don't know. But anyway, I guess it all worked out in the end. But that was also interesting looking back later when I realized who he was.
Yeah. What did you do in your master's?
The topic was vehicle routing. I don't think I did anything too original. It was, just like a survey on heuristic methods. And I think there might have been some, heuristic stuff in there, but there was nothing like what I ended up doing later with exact, methods at all. Just heuristics, basically.
Right. What was the reason for leaving CMU and going to Cornell for your PhD?
Well, I mean, after I left CMU, I was in principle supposed to go to the military because, we had, for the part of the deal with the scholarship was you have to do 4 years of active duty, and but they had this program called an educational delay, which was that if you got into a graduate program or something, then you could go, but it was on your own, dime, basically. You had to fund your own way and everything. So they would just delay the military duty. And I guess I wasn't that enthusiastic about going straight into the military. I also wasn't like sure that I wanted to get a PhD, but I went and took the GRE in math. And I honestly did very poorly on it because I didn't prepare that well. And it's very difficult. The math GRE, I don't know if it still is, but it was extremely difficult. The subject test, not that, there's a main part of the GRE and then there's a subject test in math. So I did not do very well. I applied to some places, but Cornell was actually one that didn't require the GRE. And I didn't submit my scores to them. And I ended up getting in. Yeah, again, not really fully understanding like the implications and how good it was to get an offer from Cornell. I went and visited. I think I really liked Ithaca. I really liked Cornell. And yeah, I ended up just taking it without a lot of forethought, just thinking like, okay, I can do this. I have the military afterwards anyway. So, it wasn't like a big life plan or anything. I just I got in. I was like, okay, I'll go there. I'll give this a try. And yeah, it ended up working out extremely well. And I ended up finding my passion there. But I didn't actually know that was my passion, before I went, I would say. Although I did really love OR.
Did you enjoy living in Ithaca?
Yeah, I did. I really liked Ithaca. I mean, a lot of people don't like it so much. I guess there's different reasons for that. Like it is pretty isolated. It's not near any big cities, and the weather can be not great in the winter. It can be very dark, and but yeah, I am a big outdoors person, and like the hiking and the biking and all that stuff was great there. And we did a lot of skiing in the winter. There was a place that was pretty cheap to go ski during the week. So there was a group of us that would go skiing. It's called Greek Peak. It's like an hour from Ithaca, I think. So we would just head up there, and they had these special tickets that you could buy at night and on off hours and things, so we could afford to go. And yeah, so I really loved Ithaca when I was there. Yeah.
What about the experience with your research group and living the academic life there at Cornell?
Yeah, I mean, it was really a great experience. Maybe I just got lucky with the group of people that were there. I mean, there was a very social group, and we did a lot of things together, even though it was extremely difficult and I worked very hard. I didn't sleep that much. We still, ended up doing a lot of sports and different activities as a group. We joined actually the intramural sports leagues. We were actually, as grad students, we were allowed to take gym classes with the undergrads. And I had always wanted to learn to play hockey, and hockey is actually a pretty big thing at Cornell. So I took multiple semesters, I took hockey class with the undergrads, and I learned how to skate, and then I would go over to the skating rink at lunch, on a regular basis, and I just taught myself how to skate and learned hockey, and then I started playing hockey. There were some grad student hockey leagues, and we used to go to the hockey games, which were really fun, really, really fun.
So you played matches with the students there?
Yeah. I mean, just informal, not anything too formal. But Ithaca had some outdoor skating rinks because it's cold enough in the winter there. You can just have outdoor, and you could get really inexpensive ice time. Ice time is very expensive generally for hockey, but you could get really inexpensive ice time at like midnight or something. So yeah, there were a group of people that would go and play hockey basically like very late at night, like midnight. And yeah, I used to go and do that. Yeah,
but no power plays or anything more rough.
It wasn't too rough. Yeah, no, I mean, it's nice people. Not too rough.
That's great. Did you have the chance to see or meet Carl Sagan?
I never did, and I mean, even I knew where he lived, but even his house is almost, I don't think you can really even see it from the road. So yeah, no, I never met him or even saw him. Yeah.
What did you study in your PhD?
So the topic, I had a couple of different facets to my dissertation. I guess that it was ostensibly all about vehicle routing, so kind of exact methods for vehicle routing. But that was really just a motivating application. I guess the real research was in the development of a solver, which was kind of more of a solver framework. So it had the idea of plugins and things. And so the VRP solver that I developed based on that was more of a demonstration of like, okay, if you plug in the heuristics here and the cuts here and things, then it'll, you can make it solve VRPs, but you could also solve other kinds of combinatorial problems. And that was also a parallel solver. So this was really before the current, multi-core days. So we only had single core on the desktop, and, Cornell had a huge cluster. I mean, physically huge. I think it had maybe 500 cores, but it was, the entire top floor of the building that I worked in, I think. I never saw it, to be honest. And I worked on that. So this was like early days, very early days, parallel computing, parallel branch and bound, that sort of thing. And then there was another kind of offshoot on using Fenchel cuts, what I would now call Fenchel cuts, to solve vehicle routing problems. I mean, that actually fed into a lot of the work that I have done on decomposition methods and things. So those were kind of the three thrusts.
Incidentally, I also worked with Fenchel cuts in my PhD with Eduardo Shoa. He was my co-advisor. And right. It did not lead anywhere, unfortunately. But yeah. And then when I was working on the CVRP and all that, it's where I got the chance to access the branchandcut.org webpage. And, with that blue background, I still remember the tables because I was constantly checking the bounds there. It was also during my PhD when I was working with a professor called Lucia Durmont. It turns out that she's Eduardo Shoa's wife. So so you were actually working on a parallel heuristic for a VRP variant. And then I remember when she mentioned you should better check the papers by Theodore Ralphs. So it was the first time that I think I heard your name. It was back in 2008. And of course, through that webpage, which leads me to the next question. I think you were referring to Symphony when you mentioned the framework and solver, right? And tell me the story behind the Symphony project, including some technical details.
Yeah, I wasn't the one who really started that project. So the main person behind it before I came along was Lazzi Ladagni. I think my advisor and his advisor was Les Trotter, who's not really that active anymore. But he had a big grant to do computational stuff, and he was not himself that computational. So he recruited, a few students to do the work on the grant. And Lazzi was very patient with me because actually, when I started my PhD, I didn't actually want to do computation. I started out thinking that I was just going to be totally theoretical, and I wanted to, prove theorems about facets and things like that. That was my my thinking. And then, and I was working with David Schmoys. He actually ended up going on sabbatical, and then it kind of made sense for me to switch advisors. So I switched to Les, and, he had this money to do computing. And so Latsi, was very patient with me while I learned all the stuff about segmentation faults and all these things that, I still remember, like, walking down the hall and I'm like, I'm getting a segmentation fault. What is that? And the kind of questions that now my students ask me, and I'm like, oh, okay, just go and Google it, But there was no Google, and yeah, so Latsi was actually very formative mentor for me at that time. So the two of us, I guess, basically developed what was, I think at that time, called CompSys, and his wife was also part of the team and also did some work on it, and a few other people later. And so we did that work. Then he went to IBM, and we'll probably talk about Cornuéjols later, but he went to IBM and got involved with Cornuéjols, and I kept working on CompSys during my postdoc and on into later years, and I changed the name to Symphony, and eventually, released it open source. But yeah, it goes back to really that like grant that Les had, and Latsi was really, I would say, the person who got it started, and then the two of us together worked on it. And then, of course, since then, I've continued to work on it my entire career, and I'm still working on it.
So you were the one who came with the name Symphony?
Yes. If you know me, you know that I like acronyms a lot. Well, it's a lot easier now because there are acronym generators and things that you can use. But yeah, I came up with the name Symphony, which is an acronym, although I don't really spell it out too much anymore. I just call it Symphony. But it had a double meaning, so it was like, I think, serial and multi-process optimization over networks or something like that. And then, of course, Symphony being like, a bunch of things working together. And yeah, so I later found out that IBM had a trademark on a software called Symphony. It was, I think, a spreadsheet or something. I don't know, but fortunately, they never raised any issue with that. But
I see. So you finished your PhD in 1995. How many papers you got from your thesis?
Yeah, so it's funny. My advisor, I guess, because he was further on in his career and was already kind of established and didn't really push publication that much. And I was too naive to realize how important it was. So I didn't end up publishing the first paper out of my dissertation until I think 2002 or so.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I went to the military right after PhD and hadn't published anything up until then, and kind of continued to dabble and work on stuff on the side. It's more kind of almost as a hobby, but didn't manage to push the paper out until I became an assistant professor, and then it was like a lot more important. Finally got the paper out. Yeah.
So what did you do?
That's the only one, really.
So what did you do in your military years? Did you apply for jobs? Did you attend conferences? Did you kept on coding? How did you make yourself busy other than doing the military duties?
Yeah, I was in the military. I was a data analyst, so I was in principle doing statistics, statistical analysis for flight and weapons test data. That was interesting. There was never really enough data to do anything statistically significant. And it was a bit of a, I guess, frustrating experience, although very rewarding in many ways also in terms of like the people that I met and the experiences that I had. But yeah, I also continued going to conferences when I could, and they let me actually take some leave and go to conferences. So I went to ISMP. My first ISMP was in Lausanne in 97, I think. And that was where I actually met Jeff Linderoth. Interestingly, just like got on the train to go to the conference, and like he was standing right next to me and started chatting with him. I had no idea like that our research was actually at that time very close. I mean, he was doing also parallel computing and things. It just, and then he ended up coming to Lehigh, and so that was a very fortuitous meeting. But yeah, so I did a few things. I guess went to Informs probably a few times, and just tried to stay current with the thought that, well, maybe I'm going to go back to academia, but I didn't really know actually at that time. I wasn't like focused on being a professor or anything. I thought I might do some industry job. I wasn't really sure. There's a running theme of my life that I was never really sure what I wanted to do. But it always somehow worked out in the end, like, somehow. I don't know how it all worked out, but somehow it did.
Yeah, it's quite amusing because you work with decision making, but you're constantly failing to make, decisions like with a lot of confidence, let's say.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Eventually went for a postdoc at Rice University under the supervision of Bill Cook. How was the experience of working with him, and what research activities did you conduct during that period?
Yeah, I mean, it was really a tremendous opportunity to go there. I mean, I went at the time, David Applegate was there and Bill Cook, and Bob Bixby was not really around very much, but he had an office. So I was like in the quartet of offices with them, which, is just, another one of these. Of course I knew who Bill Cook was at that time, but, I'm not sure I fully appreciated that opportunity either.
Again,
the
same underlying theme going on.
It was really an amazing chance, and of course, even the fact that afterwards David left, and it was a rare chance to see that team in action. So I was actually partly funded on this grant that was developing something called Treadmarks, which was a way of sort of doing distributed computation in an automated way. So you would write code with OpenMP directives in it, and then underneath it would compile into some distributed parallel application with MPI. And so I actually took Symphony and did some stuff with it around that. And I mean, Symphony was distributed parallel. I ended up converting it into a shared memory parallel, and I just did a lot of work with that. That was actually I spent a lot of time working on Symphony actually, because that was relevant to the grant. But Bill pretty much let me do my own thing. It was kind of nice.
Yeah, when I was working with that parallel algorithm, I was using OpenMP and MPI, trying to combine both, because the idea of using shared memory and distributed memory on a sort of a hybrid multi-core cluster. So multi-cores were just starting at that time. We ended up using MPI only, but it was a very interesting experience. So that was my adventure into parallel computing, and that's. And how did you find a position at Lehigh University in the year 2000?
Yeah, I didn't actually have that many opportunities, to be honest, because of the aforementioned lack of publication. So actually, I was at Informs. I think I met some of the guys from Lehigh. I wasn't thinking of applying to Lehigh before that, because Lehigh is right next door to where I grew up. I mean, I kind of, thought, I don't want to go back home right now so soon. I mean, I'm young. I want to travel and see the world, and but they were very encouraging, and so I applied and went and interviewed, and they, it just worked out. They were actually, I guess, kind of looking to build. I mean, at that time there was it was a push to do things related to information technology. Information technology.
Yeah.
It seems like an old word now, and I guess they thought that, with my expertise in parallel computing and these things, that I could help take the department in a bit of a different direction. Because at that time it was just changing from like a more of a manufacturing based kind of industrial engineering to, more what it is now, like operations research and optimization things. So I was one of the first hires in that wave of optimizers that came later. And so, yeah, I got the offer and just, again, like wasn't what I was planning or, but it just kind of worked out, and I went, and even then I was not thinking that I would probably stay for a long time, but it's just continued to get better and better, and we hired a lot of good people, and they let me influence the direction of things quite a bit, and so that kept me thinking that it was a great place to be, and it's worked out all these years.
Yeah, that's great. And I can see that you are not much of a planner, but somehow things keep working for you, so that's good for you. So you kept on working with parallel computing for a few more years, right?
Yeah, actually, I got an NSF grant to do parallel computing right off the bat. Actually, the first grant I ever applied for to NSF, I got, and it was another thing that I didn't really realize how difficult it was to get NSF grants and how lucky that was. But it was another one of these kind of right place, right time. I mean, there was a big program at that time. I forget what it was called exactly, but it was a big push for doing this kind of thing, like parallel computing. And I just, happened to be presenting them with exactly the kind of thing that they wanted to fund. And so I think I got a little bit lucky with that. So yeah, I kept doing that for a while, obviously with the grant, developed another software package called CHIPS, which was, had sort of multiple facets to it, but ultimately it was like a distributed parallel MIP solver, but trying to improve on the approach that Symphony took and do something a little better, more scalable. And then, I eventually kind of moved a little bit away from that because parallel branch and bound is actually quite a challenging thing. And like I like kind of hit a wall, and I just started getting more interested in other things. Yeah, so I eventually moved away from that, but I still do it. I still dabble in that kind of thing.
And Ted, how did you balance between the theoretical work and software development over the years?
That is a good question. I guess I have a strong interest in both, and so I've really wanted to keep my foot in both camps, but it's really not that easy to do. I mean, doing software development on any kind of serious level as an assistant professor is probably not a great idea. It takes a lot of time. I guess anyone will give you the advice that you shouldn't, it's not something you should do. But, I became very hooked on doing that kind of work. And I guess my feeling was, well, I'm just going to do what I'm passionate about and not really worry too much. I mean, I have skills, if they don't give me tenure, then I'll just go do something else. So yeah, I tried to balance it. I think at times I probably spent way too much time on doing the software development stuff because, it doesn't really reap the same benefits as writing theory does in terms of publication credit and things. So that was something I was always pretty cognizant of. I mean, again, it kind of worked out in the end because, the world changed a little bit, and then I was able to make the arguments a little bit more easily with Cornuéjols and things being so public. And but yeah, it's not an easy balance to make. It's not easy.
Yeah, I can imagine. And could you talk about your main contributions in bilevel optimization?
Well, to go way back, I was originally thinking of doing some kind of warm starting for mixed integer programming where, trying to take what is done in LP and kind of generalize it. And that led me to looking into duality and the value function and those things which I've, continued to work on and look at since then, pretty much my entire career. I then had a student who was kind of like saying, "Oh, I want to do some game theory." He went off and read the literature and came back and said, "Oh, there's this thing Bilevel," and like I never had heard of Bilevel before. But I said, "Okay, we'll start looking at it." And then it just turned out that, this duality stuff was sort of exactly the right tool there, and we had the idea of, kind of, let's try to figure out if we can generalize things like branch and cut and to bilevel integer programs. So there was already quite a bit of work in the LP, bilevel LP case, because there you have, a compact strong dual of the second level problem. You can take the dual and reformulate it using KKT. But there wasn't that much known about the integer case. I mean, there was an algorithm, but a basic branch and bound that was by Moore and Bard, and some other papers, but not that much known. So we started working on branch and cut, and we had some simple cuts which weren't that effective, but at least you could show, okay, you can actually solve these things with branch and cut. And that turned into the solver MIBS, which I'm still working on today. And a lot of stuff basically started happening in the bilevel integer arena. Some other people joined and started doing very good work. And now it's quite a vibrant community, I would say. So yeah, so I think maybe the contribution is just getting it started and developing MIBS and doing all the work in duality, and so a lot of different facets of it. But yeah, it's of course there's now a whole community that's doing this work, and it's actually nice to see that it took off that way.
Yeah, for sure. There has been an increasing number of people working with bilevel optimization and trying to develop bilevel software. There's this recent paper by my friend Joaquin Garcia, where he developed a Julia package for bilevel optimization. And I suspect you managed that paper that appeared in Informed Journal Computing. So
yes,
yeah,
I did.
And Ted, I think there are many people who are not familiar with your decomposition-based solver framework for mixed integer linear programs called DIP. Could you provide some details about it?
Yeah, so this was something that really kind of came out of my dissertation. So I wanted to do, I guess we know that theoretically Danzig-Wolff decomposition and Lagrangian relaxation are equivalent. They're basically two different ways of computing the same bound. But there isn't a lot of work that's really comparing these two approaches directly to each other. So, anytime you have a Danzig-Wolff or a column generation, you could alternatively do, Lagrangian relaxation. These two things are computationally much different, but it's always been kind of a question in my mind. If you really compare them head on head with all things being held equal as much as possible, what would that look like? I think there's a lot of papers where people do one or the other without really thinking, okay, I could have done the other. So DIP was partly about that, but also about the idea that, okay, you have this subproblem that you can solve very efficiently. That's the basis of column generation and Lagrangian relaxation. You can also, of course, use the fact that you can solve that subproblem efficiently to generate ventral cuts or do other things that are more cutting plane based. So DIP was, it still hasn't really reached its full potential. Like there are still parts of it that are undone, but the idea of it was, okay, we have cutting plane methods, we have column generation, we have Lagrangian. They're all based on some level on the ability to solve, some relaxation and exploit it in different ways. And if we can really have in a single framework this way of just flipping a switch and saying, okay, here's a subproblem solver. You just flip a switch and you get, ventral cuts over here, you get column generation over here, you get Lagrangian relaxation over here, and all embedded inside of a branch and bound. And then also different ways of hybridizing those. So DIP can actually generate cuts in the original space while it's doing column generation in the Danzig Wolf space. So there are all these different ways of mixing and matching. And so I had, of course, like funding runs out and students graduate and you have to move on. But there was like a really long vision for that project, which, it's still kind of just sitting there waiting. Maybe I'll get back to it someday.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
This
that was the idea there. And it was built on top of this CHIPS framework, which was the parallel framework. So like there could also be parallel stuff done there, and it's just all kinds of potential things. But
yeah, this quest of developing automated decomposition frameworks in combinatorial optimization has been a topic of interest of some researchers, including, for example, François van der Beek with his Babcode and
Right.
other folks. Of course, Skip, which is quite well known, but it requires a lot of effort, and I think there should be more involvement of the community towards this type of endeavors. So I wish you can, attract other young enthusiastic researchers to give you some help and, boost this project, because the more software we have to make our lives easier when implementing this type of algorithms, I think the better. Right? Because, sometimes the theory is quite complicated and the algorithms get too intricate, and that prevents one from, implementing a column generation based algorithm in practice conveniently. And all this effort is really welcome. Ted, we have to talk about the CoinOR project. I mean, when thinking about your name, it is very natural to connect with such a project. Could you tell the story behind it and your involvement over the years?
yeah, so CoinOR was really the impetus of the folks at IBM Research back. I think it was actually announced at the ISMP in Atlanta in 2000. So they had obviously been working on it before that. One of the people that was involved in that was Latsi Ladany, who I mentioned, and then John Forrest and Robin Luigi and some other people at IBM. Alan King. So they had this idea at that time. IBM, I guess, was pushing for open source, for things to be open sourced, and they were going to become a services company. And so there wasn't, this was kind of symbiotic, I think, with what was going on at IBM at that time. So they had developed a couple of different projects, CLP, CoinUtils, OSI, and BCP was a framework that was supposed to make, doing column generation easier, kind of a framework. And that was generalizing some of the things that were in Symphony to a C++ environment. Symphony also, I should have mentioned, did some column generation and things. That was also part of my dissertation, a very rudimentary form of column generation. So that was the idea. And so because Latsi was involved, I had the connection with him, and he knew obviously that about Symphony, and he was one of the developers of that. So I started, interacting with the guys at IBM after CoinOR had already gotten started, and eventually was convinced to, put Symphony in there as an open source project, and really got more and more involved over time and became like one of the, main drivers behind it, and have just stayed with that for, obviously a pretty long time. Then also became one of the founders of the foundation, which came out of this. So it was originally an effort within IBM Research. Other people could contribute, but it was managed within IBM Research. But their goal was to spin it off into some community-based thing, which we did. So we took it and made it into a nonprofit foundation and took it outside of IBM and made it into, more of a community-based effort. And yeah, that was done, I think, around 2004. And then since then, I guess we're coming up on like the 20th anniversary now of the foundation itself. And, it's continued to to go on. Whether it's growing and is another question, but I don't want to say it continues to grow because I don't know if that's true. But anyway, yeah. So
Yeah, that was my
I'm still
question.
working a lot on it.
How would you place the CoinOR project nowadays?
I mean, we're constantly struggling with that question because it served a much more obvious purpose back in the early days. So this was before, GitHub and even before SourceForge and some other things. I mean, I think SourceForge was around then, but there just wasn't a lot of free infrastructure available for developing open source projects. And so IBM, hosted what was then a CVS repository to do the versioning and maintenance. We set up some wikis using something called Track. And, it was a lot of work to maintain all of that infrastructure. We had mailing lists and so on. So back then, it definitely was something where there wasn't much alternative. So people that wanted to maintain their software in the open and be part of a community and things, pretty much, CoinOR was the only game in town. Over time, the need for that kind of went away. So now we have GitHub, we have CI in the cloud and all these things. So everything is pretty much free. There's no need for the maintenance of the infrastructure. And at the same time, other open source projects have come along, like Skip. So it's a little bit less clear, like what the mission of CoinOR should be going forward. And that's something we've kind of been engaging the community in discussion of, like what should the role be? I mean, part of the mission of CoinOR that was envisioned in the beginning, which never quite came to fruition, was to be almost like a publication venue for software. That still is something we talk about doing, but now there are actually outlets like the Journal of Open Source Software for publishing code, as well as the software tools area at Journal on Computing now, which I'm involved with, obviously. So it's not that clear where CoinOR is going in the future. There's also a lot of legacy code in CoinOR, which is used but not developed, and it's a lot of work to maintain it, keep it going every time, new compiler versions come out and new, all these changes in Conda and Homebrew and all the places where it's packaged, not to mention Linux distros and all that. It's a lot of work to just like keep it out there and maintained. And there's no funding for it. So yeah, we're still trying to answer that question ourselves. So maybe this is my chance to throw it out to the community and say, what do you think CoinOR is? What should it be? I mean, we're really open to a discussion on that. What is the value proposition and the use case for it these days? I'm not sure I know. I mean, for me personally, I still use all the CoinOR code heavily in my research. So I have a motivation to keep it going. But whether we keep CBC around forever or replace it with something like Highs over time, that's a bit unclear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's no question about the impact of the CoinOR project, at least in my opinion. I bet many people have used and still use CBC as an alternative open source solver for their applications. We ourselves use it. So you should be proud of the initiative, and I hope you get funding and all the necessary help to keep the project alive and the foundation as well. I think your work is not necessarily as appreciated as it should be, and also not you yourself, but also other people that have contributed, including, of course, John Forrest and Haroldo Gambini, for example, who's my friend. He did a lot of important contributions for the CBC solver. So let's hope for a clear and promising future regarding the project. So I wish you all the best, right? Ted, do you think that those who develop free optimization software received enough recognition?
I mean, that's a bit of a self-serving question, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I personally feel that I have received a lot of recognition. So, for me, I don't really feel like I deserve more recognition than I've gotten. But in general, I think the issue is not recognition per se. I guess it's the recognition of it as a contribution that's equal to other kinds of research output.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, so in that sense, I mean, I guess it's obvious that no, people are not really getting recognition for it. So we are trying to change that. I mean, that is actually, I would say, almost an explicit goal of the software tools area, is to provide a way of getting a publication where, so there is a paper that's in a well-regarded journal that you can point to and say, like, okay, this is my contribution. But still, the main focus is on the software, and we've tried to put the software front and center by starting up this GitHub repository of software that's associated with papers in the journal on computing, and now that's actually gone to all areas of the journal. So we're actually presenting that GitHub repository as itself as a contribution. It gets its own DOI. And so it's almost like the paper is a companion to that in the software tools area as opposed to the other way around. And, I think it's just going to be a long road, but this is happening more and more. I think even in the machine learning community, especially in the machine learning community, like the digital artifacts that, the software, the open source software and things are seen as a major contribution, aside from the paper itself. But, there's a lot to be done to really get to the point where everyone is getting credit for doing the kind of work and putting in, I guess, the additional effort that it really takes to put software out there in a way that it's going to be useful to the community. We're still not there as far as knowing, how to judge that kind of contribution. So we need to do a lot more work. I mean, that's what we're trying to do over time when I'm working with the AEs, both at Journal on Computing and at Operations Research, to try to, figure out what it looks like to review software and what the standard should be and how you judge that as a separate, as its own contribution. And that is, not easy. And that's what needs to be done before we can really say that, okay, people are getting credit for this in the way that they should. So there's a lot of work to be done still. I mean, it's not just a simple thing of saying like, oh, this should be, people should get credit for this, because you have to have a way of judging it and, putting everything in perspective. So yeah, it's a long road, but I think finally we're getting traction on that. And really the way to do it is to do it through existing journals, at least in the beginning, because it's hard to launch something like a COR and then just immediately have that accepted at the level of deans and, as something legitimate. So.
Yeah, you partially answered my question. I was about to ask, what are your views on how people from our community look at software when it comes to measuring their relevance and impact? I mean, do you think that we know how to do that right now?
I mean, I think the view of software has changed a lot. I would say, 20 years ago, people were writing software, but I think it was viewed more as okay, I have this theoretical algorithm and I need to write a paper about it. I want to show that it works empirically, but I'm just going to write this one-off code and I'll just hack it together. But the main contribution is still, the theoretical algorithm, and the software is kind of maybe going to be tossed aside and no one's really going to look at it. I think that was kind of the view. The main contribution was the paper itself. And, you had a table of results, and that had to be generated somehow, but it wasn't really the main thing. But now I think there's more and more people who really view it as something they want to develop an algorithm. They realize that actually the empirical side of developing algorithms is a whole different thing. It's a whole thing on its own. Making things work empirically is is just a much different thing than making them work in working out the theoretical mathematical ideas behind the algorithm. And I think there's more people that see the value in putting in the extra effort to actually make software that works in practice and is maintainable and extensible and will stick around for a long time. And that's kind of what CoinOR, I guess part of the legacy of CoinOR is just that it created a model for how that can be done and showed the community, okay, this is how you do it if you want to maintain long living software. And it's continued to be maintained. I mean, Symphony goes all the way back to my dissertation. So I think this is, if we want the things that we discover to have a long-lasting impact, and especially if we want the technology to transfer to other fields, the way to do it really is to put it in software and let it be a living thing. I mean, the papers are necessary to prove that everything works, but in the end, like the thing that lives on is the software, and I think that's a really important aspect of what we do.
Yeah. One of my concerns is, for example, when you speak about maintaining a software. Okay, let's say that publish the first version is something that is doable, but then there's a lot of work to maintain it, and then you don't get a credit for that. In a form of a paper. So how to look at these situations and keep the people encouraged to maintain the software while ensuring that they get a credit for that?
Yeah, I mean, I myself face this exact issue. I mean, I guess my solution to the problem so far has been that, you have to, if you want to publish about a new version of the software, it has to have something theoretical in it that you can write the paper on, and then that's the focus. But that's not exactly what you want. I mean, you really want to give people a way of publishing about the same software but with additional things. And I think we're actually open to that at Journal on Computing. That's not something that we've had so far, but given that the focus is on the software, I think if there is a new version with new capabilities, we'd be open to seeing a paper about the same another paper about the same software. It's certainly something we've talked about, but just like anything, just like a theoretical paper, you have to have a standard for, okay, how much additional stuff does there need to be for it to be a significant contribution? I mean, I guess it's still a question. The work that needs to be done just to maintain software is significant, and it's harder to imagine how anyone could get credit for that if they're not developing anything, like if they're just maintaining, which is what I've been doing with a lot of the codes that I have, it's just maintaining them. Yeah, I don't know an answer to that other than, I guess if you maintain them, they open doors for collaboration, and maybe, you can find ways for your software to have an impact, by working with someone in another area that needs that capability or something like that. I mean, I personally haven't had a lot of chances to do that, but I could imagine like that is one way of doing it. I mean, of course, I do come in contact with lots of people that are using various software packages that I maintain. And I guess if I wanted to, I could go in the direction of trying to, establish collaborations there, and then you can get the credit maybe sort of indirectly for maintaining the software because it's out there for people to use, and that creates the opportunities. So that may be the way to go with that.
Right. I asked you if our community knows how to look at software. How about empirical work? Do you actually know how to make proper evaluations?
I mean, I won't say that we don't know if we set our minds to it, but I think there's been, the focus has definitely been more on the theoretical side, at least in the optimization community, as far as publication goes. I think a lot of times there's a theoretical algorithm, and then the computational results are not really analyzed at a level more than just like, okay, we ran the algorithm on this test set, and the results kind of look like this. And you can actually do more rigorous analysis and do statistical testing and things for empirical data, just like we do for other kinds of data. And I don't think that's really done. There are a lot of reasons for that, and there are a lot of things that need to happen in order for that, I guess, a little more rigor on the empirical side. One thing is that the skills and the training that you need to do that kind of work are just entirely different. So we have to change probably the way that we train PhD students. But it's also, not that cheap to get empirical data. So a lot of the issue is just not having enough. People don't have access to the resources that they need to generate huge empirical data sets to really be able to prove things in a statistically rigorous way. So, I don't really know the answer to that exactly, except that there is obviously more and more compute available. And, hopefully over time, people will just have access to enough compute that they can actually generate the data needed to do more rigorous analysis.
Right. Ted, you are area editor of data, software, and computation in operations research, and area editor of software tools in informed journal computing. So you're now not only a person that advocates in favor of open source software, but also became a gatekeeper in that regard. And that gives you a lot of responsibility. How do you see yourself in that role?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not that comfortable with being a gatekeeper. I don't really like that role. But I would say that I view it more as, I have the chance now to pursue this, I guess, pursue my passion for this idea that kind of work is important and it deserves to be put front and center. And so I guess that even in my editorial role, I'm mostly thinking of my role as that of like encouraging people to do this kind of work and providing the venue for them to get a reward for it. So obviously, we do have to have editorial standards, and papers do get rejected. But I do my best to try to let people know how they can do better when the paper is rejected. But yeah, I guess I think of it more in a positive sense, not as gatekeeping, but as just setting an example and hopefully encouraging the community to move in a certain direction that I think is the right one. And I'm just very happy that I get that chance. I mean, honestly, I didn't think that this would happen in my career. I, of course, have talked to many people about these issues over time, and I kind of assumed that it would just always be talk. But, I have to give credit to Dave Woodruff, who started the software tools area and handed it to me. He was the one who really said, okay, this is the time. And he was retiring as editor-in-chief and just said, okay, we're just going to start this area and this is going to be the idea of it. And then he just handed it to me. And, so, right place, right time again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess that's how I view it, and hopefully that's the impact will be in that positive direction, not as a gatekeeper, but as a cheerleader, I guess.
Nice. And what's your take on academic metrics such as age index, impact factor, and so on?
I mean, I think they're highly flawed. But I also don't know exactly how to do something better. I mean, it's obvious when you look at the Google Scholar pages of different people that the correlation between those things and the impact and the quality of people's work is not very good. I mean, there are people doing very good work that have a low level of citation and vice versa. But it's one thing that you can go on, I guess. Citations in general are just a terrible metric because, of course, things get cited for reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of the thing itself. And if you write a paper about a data set or something, then of course MIPLib, the MIPLib papers that I've been on are among my most highly cited papers. And I mean, the last paper that we wrote on MIPLib was actually, I think, quite a good, contribution on its own, as it talked about how to develop a test set but, I mean, of course, those papers get lots of citations because people cite them just because they're using MIPLib. So yeah, it's a very imperfect thing, but I think like when you look around, you see that this is recognized. I mean, people that are doing good work and whose citation counts are not as high are still succeeding because, ultimately people can see that this is the case. I guess where it's a little bit more damaging is in the bigger world, when you apply for NSF grants and things and you're just being judged on paper and it's not within the community but outside, then, of course, just generally speaking, our citation counts in the community are lower than other communities. The impact factors are lower. So, yeah, that's something we have to think about and talk about, but I don't know the solution to that. But I will say that getting the software out and used by other communities is one way of I think a way of getting more citations for us from outside is by like putting out software that people can use and not forcing them to read our papers, which are in our own arcane language and aren't easily understood by anyone outside the community. Software is more easily understood. I mean, you can use it, you can see what it does. So I think software is maybe the bridge to, maybe it's part of the solution to that.
Yeah. I see what you mean. I was talking to Eduardo Show about this the other day, and he told me that one way of mitigating the distortions of, let's say, H-index is to disregard self-citations, for example. This can be easily obtained using Scopus. So I see what you mean, and I agree with you. And there's no easy answer for this question or what should be done to try to, devise proper metrics to evaluate work, journals, and, researchers. Let's change topics. From your website, I can see that you have many hobbies like taking photographs, reading, cycling, and you also seem to be a very adventurous person, and enjoy to be involved in activities like backpacking, climbing, diving, skydiving, and so on. How all of these hobbies and activities have been important in your life?
I mean, I guess I've always wanted to be a well-rounded person. Like this goes back to what I said earlier about doing athletics and trying not to become, just a nerd, so to speak. Not that there's, of course, I don't judge people that go. I mean, I am a nerd, obviously, but I've always wanted to try to stay, well-rounded. And I mean, of course, it's like an Instagram world, so all this stuff looks like, oh, he's doing all these things. But I mean, of course I am. I love to travel. I mean, my wife and I and my son love to travel, and we're gonna, that's something that is actually very compatible with the academic lifestyle. And that's, I mean, part of the, I guess, way that I've managed to do all that stuff is because having an academic career is highly compatible with traveling around and seeing things. So I guess that's part of what's kept me in the academic arena is that, yeah, okay, you have to work very hard, and sometimes it's, it is hard to find that balance, but you do also get the chance to travel. And so all those things that you see, all those adventures were all done, in tandem with some academic endeavor or other, visiting people. I've had, sabbaticals in different places, and we're just about to go on sabbatical again. So yeah, it's not easy. I mean, the the work tends to just take over, and especially with the maintaining software and things. But somehow you find the balance and figure out a way to merge the academic conferences and academic visits with doing some traveling and adventuring and things. And yeah, so it's a constant struggle.
Any final message for the open source community or those passionate about developing software tools in the context of OR and optimization?
I mean, I guess I would, just encourage people to look into the opportunities that are available now through software tools. And, if you have a passion for doing this kind of work, then you should figure out a way to do it. I mean, it's not for everybody, but I think that it's a lot easier now to, start to get some academic credit. I think it has a big impact. And so it's important, to do. And I guess I'm pleased that more and more people are choosing to go that route. I think also with GitHub, it's much easier than it used to be to just throw something out on the web and see what happens. If you can get some people working with you and develop a community, then that's fantastic. And it's very rewarding. I constantly hear from people that are using software that I maintain. And in some ways, it's like a much more interactive, hands-on thing than a paper, right? I mean, a paper just sits and lives statically, and probably you don't get that much feedback. At least I usually don't get that much feedback on work that I do in papers. But the software is more of a direct contact. You see people, you hear from people that are using it. They ask questions, and you get to engage with them, and it's quite rewarding, I would say. Yeah. So I would encourage people to do that if that's what they're passionate about.
Right. Yeah. I also tend to get more feedback by the viewers and listeners of the podcast than the readers of my own papers. So yeah. Although I cannot complain about citations and all that, but still, I think we can sort of make a parallel with software, like producing other stuff that may have some impact that is not really easy to measure, as we discussed today, but it's very rewarding at the same time. Yeah. Ted, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. And if you are, thinking of going to an adventurous place in your next sabbatical, you can consider visiting us here in Jupe. So thanks a lot for your time.
I will do that. Yeah, thank you for doing this podcast. It's really had an impact already, and I'm sure it will, through the years as you accumulate more and more interviews. It's really nice.
Yeah. Okay, Ted, take care, and I hope you keep the energy to produce a lot of frameworks, packages, and softwares for our community. We'll be very grateful for that. So keep up the good work. And talk to you.
Thank you very much.
So,
thank you very much.
Ciao. Bye.
See ya.